Cop forcefully shaves black woman's head, only to realize she's the judge. The night crackled with tension as bright red and blue lights washed over the deserted Philadelphia street. Officer Lance Merrick's voice boomed through a bullhorn, commanding the driver of a sleek black sedan to exit the vehicle. He thought he'd cornered a suspect in a routine traffic stop, someone who had no power, no recourse. Little did he know, the woman he confronted was Judge Adana Carter, a jurist known for her relentless pursuit of justice. In mere minutes, a line would be crossed, her hair forcefully shaved, her dignity shattered. And by the end of this harrowing ordeal, fate would deliver a swift lesson in karma. Officer Lance Merrick believed he had everything under control. He was a decorated member of the Philadelphia Police Department, having spent 5 years on the force with a mostly clean track record. At 33, Merrick was tall, with a commanding presence and a rigid sense of authority, a man who rarely tolerated any sign of defiance. The uniform felt like an extension of his pride, a symbol of order in a chaotic city. But behind his polished exterior lay a tangled web of insecurities. He had grown up in a tough neighborhood on the outskirts of North Philly, watching his single mother struggle to keep food on the table. He'd made a promise to himself that one day he would stand on the side of power so that he would never again feel helpless. Over the years, this determination evolved into a hardened perspective. He viewed compliance as a necessity and any challenge to his authority as a personal affront. It was a late Tuesday night, the streets almost empty. Merrick was parked in his patrol car near the intersection of Broad and Lombard, a place known for speeding violations and the occasional drunk driver heading home from late-night bars. His partner, Officer Maria Thompson, dozed lightly in the passenger seat, lulled by the hum of the engine and the quiet city night. Suddenly, a sleek, black BMW rolled through a stop sign without fully halting. Merrick's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, adrenaline sparking in his veins. He pulled out behind the car and flipped on the siren, jolting Thompson awake. The driver, apparently startled, braked too hard, tires squealing as the BMW pulled over. Merrick's heart drummed with anticipation. Finally, something to break the monotony of the shift. Exiting the squad car, Merrick placed a hand on his holster. He cast his flashlight into the rear window of the BMW. He couldn't see much beyond a glimpse of a dark-skinned woman at the wheel, her posture upright, almost regal. She seemed composed, which only made Merrick suspicious. Most people fumbled with their IDs or showed immediate fear. This woman just waited, both hands visible on the steering wheel, exuding a quiet confidence. Merrick asked the standard questions, voice as assertive as he could manage. "Driver's license and registration, ma'am." The window slid down smoothly. A calm, controlled voice emerged from the driver's seat. "Certainly, officer." She moved carefully, as though to assure him she posed no threat, retrieving her documents from her purse. Her gaze never flinched, not even when his flashlight briefly shone in her eyes. Officer Thompson stepped up, radio in hand. She glanced at the woman, recognized a subtle air of command, but said nothing. Merrick studied the license closely. The name read Adana Carter. She was from a well-to-do district, judging by the address. He saw no previous violations in the record that popped up on his onboard system. Everything looked in order, other than the minor traffic infraction. "Miss Carter," Merrick began, "you rolled through that stop sign. I'm going to have to issue a citation." Adana Carter nodded. "I understand, officer. However, I did come to a complete stop." She paused, likely catching the shift in Merrick's expression. He did not take kindly to being corrected. "Perhaps the first slowed a bit late," she added diplomatically, "but I respect your decision." Something about her tone grated on Merrick. She sounded too calm, too self-assured. People usually babbled excuses or apologized profusely. She simply stood by her account of the situation. Unnerved, Merrick walked back to the cruiser to run a final check on her plates. Thompson followed, eyebrows raised. "Lance," she whispered, "it's just a traffic stop. Write the ticket. Let's move on." "I don't like her attitude," Merrick replied. "She's trying to get under my skin," Thompson shrugged. "She's cooperating. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." But a stubborn spark had already ignited in Merrick's mind. He waited for the computer's search results, only to confirm what the license suggested: no arrest history, a valid driver's license, and standard insurance. No red flags, no warrants. If anything, she appeared squeaky clean. He returned to Adana's driver side window. "Step out of the car, please," he ordered. "I need to verify something." Adana's eyebrows rose. "Officer, I've handed you all valid documentation. Is there a reason for me to exit the vehicle?" There was no aggression in her voice, merely a firm question. Merrick's frustration mounted. "I gave you an order, ma'am," she exhaled, quietly but audibly. "Understood." She opened the door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Merrick did not miss the impeccable tailoring of her business suit or the glint of a high-quality watch. The traffic stop had escalated to a confrontation. Thompson, seeing the tension, tapped Merrick's shoulder gently. "Let's keep it calm," she whispered. He merely shook her off, determined to handle this his way. He asked a series of rapid-fire questions, each more invasive than the last, all intended to rattle the woman in front of him. Her answers remained unwaveringly consistent. She had just left a late dinner meeting with a colleague. She was heading to her apartment in the Rittenhouse Square area, and so on. She showed no sign of deception or fear. Finally, Merrick commanded, "Place your hands on the hood." Adana's eyes hardened. "Excuse me? You heard me?" he snarled. "Hands on the hood." Now, her pulse quickened, but she complied. She knew the law, likely better than he did. Thompson hovered a few steps away, tension visible in her stance. Merrick began to pat Adana down far more thoroughly than the situation warranted. He claimed to be searching for weapons. She said nothing, gritting her teeth against the humiliation and pain as he pressed her arms and legs with unnecessary force. Then he reached inside her jacket pocket and found a slim, official-looking ID card. He pulled it out, squinting under the beam of his flashlight. Philadelphia Municipal Court. Superior Court Judge ID. The name read, "The Honorable Judge Adana Carter." In that moment, Adana's eyes locked onto his, but she did not speak. Thompson inhaled sharply. If Merrick had any sense, he would have realized the gravity of the situation, but pride and anger had him in their grip. He was too far gone to back down now. "Judge, huh?" he said sarcastically. "That doesn't put you above the law." She swallowed. "No, it doesn't. And I never claimed it did." He tossed her ID onto the hood with a sneer. "I'll decide if you're breaking the law or not some fancy piece of plastic. Now turn around." Adana swallowed again, her patience stretched to its limit. She turned, facing him squarely. "Officer Merrick," she said quietly, "this situation has escalated beyond a routine stop. I have every right to," but the words died on her lips as Merrick seized her wrists, yanking them behind her back. She let out a small cry of pain. Shock rippled through Thompson, who stepped forward. "Lance, that's enough." He ignored his partner, eyes fixed on Adana. "I'm placing you under arrest for obstructing a police investigation and resisting an officer." "You want to see how the law really works, Judge Carter? Let's go." Adana's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She felt the cold metal of the handcuffs snap around her wrists, the indignity of being forced to her knees. Though she had never been on the receiving end of the system she served, she had seen enough to know this was wrong. She had to keep her composure, no matter the cost. She might have the power to rectify this later, but only if she survived this night with her body and spirit intact. Thompson felt her chest tighten as she watched Merrick's aggression boil over. This was not how they had been trained. She had seen Lance get edgy in previous stops, but tonight he was crossing a line. Adana's status as a judge was not the point. No citizen deserved the treatment he was dishing out. Yet, the unspoken loyalty of the badge weighed heavily on Thompson's conscience. Telling a fellow officer he was out of line was never easy, especially one as prideful as Merrick. Still, something about the raw fear flickering in Adana's eyes spurred her to action. "Lance," she started, stepping forward, "we need to slow down. We can handle this professionally." He shot her a glare. "Back off. I've got this." Reluctantly, Thompson stepped back, but she couldn't stay silent. "The woman's not resisting, Lance. And if you haven't noticed, she's a judge. You might want to reconsider how you proceed." Merrick's jaw muscles twitched. "If she's a judge, she should know better than to argue with an officer," he hissed. Then, grabbing Adana's upper arm, he marched her toward the patrol car, ignoring her wince. In the suffocating silence, Adana's mind raced. She had always believed that her position on the bench offered her a platform to uphold justice. She had studied at Yale Law School, one of the real details that had shaped her formidable career, and spent nearly a decade working her way up from public defender to superior court judge. She prided herself on fairness, on seeing every side of an argument before delivering a verdict. But now all that training, all that moral compass seemed worthless in the face of raw police power. She tried to steady her voice. "Officer Merrick, you're making a mistake. I urge you to think carefully about the repercussions." He slammed the car door shut, cutting off her words. She was sealed in the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, helpless in a position she never imagined she would be in. Thompson stood outside, fists clenched at her sides. "What are we charging her with, Lance?" He didn't answer right away. A tense moment stretched between them as the city's nightlife continued a block away. Blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding here, finally he muttered, "Resisting arrest, interfering with an officer, and suspicion of drug possession." Thompson's eyes widened. "We have no probable cause for that last charge." "We found nothing. Don't question me," he snapped. "She's getting mouthy, and maybe she's hiding something. We'll do a thorough search at the precinct." "You're risking everything," Thompson warned softly. "Your badge, your career." "She's a superior court judge, exactly." Merrick cut her off, voice echoing with pent-up resentment. "People like her think they run the city, that they can break the law whenever they want and pull rank. Not this time. She needs a taste of real discipline." Thompson inhaled shakily. She'd seen people on power trips before, but this was a new level, and it sent chills down her spine. Still, her sense of duty told her to remain at Merrick's side. She would do her best to mitigate the damage, even if it meant testifying against him later. With a reluctant sigh, she got into the driver's seat, while Merrick took the passenger side. He insisted on writing up the arrest report in the car. Thompson began the drive downtown, heading to the nearest precinct. Each streetlight illuminated Adana's figure in the rearview mirror, a proud, dignified woman whose hair was neatly styled in a shoulder-length twist-out. She gazed straight ahead, refusing to show vulnerability, even though Thompson could see the tension in her eyes. The headquarters of the Philadelphia Police Department loomed ahead, a tall brick building with harsh fluorescent lights illuminating the entrance. Thompson parked, and Merrick quickly exited, yanking open the back door. He pulled Adana out, ignoring the slight stumble caused by her cuffed hands. The moment they stepped inside, the usual bustle of the booking area quieted. Officers and desk sergeants alike sensed something was off, a well-dressed African-American woman being hustled in by Merrick with an air of hostility. Whispers began almost immediately. Some recognized Judge Carter on sight. Others simply looked perplexed that a seemingly respectable woman was being hauled in so aggressively. Sergeant Roscoe, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, came forward. "Merrick, Thompson, what's the situation?" Merrick straightened. "We have a suspect resisting arrest and interfering with a lawful traffic stop. Possible drug possession." Roscoe's gaze flickered to Adana. "Name?" Merrick gestured to the judge dismissively. "She claims to be Judge Adana Carter." Roscoe's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Adana apologetically. You are Judge Carter, aren't you?" She nodded, massaging her wrists where the cuffs had cut into her skin. She still wore them because Merrick had refused to remove them. "Yes, I am," she said clearly. "Sergeant, if you could please instruct Officer Merrick to uncuff me and contact my attorney, I would appreciate it. This has gone far enough." Roscoe looked uneasily at Merrick. "Let's step into the holding area and talk this through." But Merrick refused to budge. "No special treatment," he insisted. "We'll process her like everyone else." "She's not above the law," Roscoe sighed. "Officer, the first understand. But she's a sitting judge. We need to handle this carefully and by the book." Merrick's face hardened. "I am handling it by the book, Sergeant." Adana, however, felt a tremor of foreboding. The stares from nearby officers, some sympathetic, some curious, burned into her. She could practically see the internal debate raging in them, the desire to defer to her authority clashing with the chain of command that required them to stand by one of their own. Roscoe asked for her personal items and placed them into a plastic evidence bag: phone, keys, watch. When he reached for her official ID, Merrick snatched it away and stuffed it in his pocket. "She won't be needing that any time soon," he growled. Adana's stomach churned with dread. "Sergeant Roscoe, please call my lawyer, Robert Powers. He works at the Friedman Law Center. He will confirm who I am, and he will rectify this situation." Roscoe murmured a subdued acknowledgement. While he headed to the phone, Merrick led Adana to a bench against the wall, instructing her to wait for a female officer to conduct a thorough search. He made certain the cuffs remained locked tight. Thompson lingered by the desk. She wanted to protest more strongly, but fear and caution kept her silent. She had an uneasy feeling that Merrick was about to take things to a level that might ruin them both. Yet she hoped that once the shift was over, reason might prevail. But reason was about to become a rare commodity. A female officer, Pasha Reynolds, appeared to do the standard pat-down and search of female detainees. She glanced at Judge Carter, recognized her instantly, and shot Merrick a wary look. "All right, Miss Carter," Reynolds said softly, a professional courtesy not lost on anyone present. "I'm going to have to do a search for contraband, but I'll be as quick as I can." Adana nodded. "I understand. Thank you, officer." Reynolds escorted Adana to a private holding room used for strip searches. Merrick tried to follow, but Reynolds blocked him. "This is standard procedure for female suspects. You'll remain outside." Merrick scowled but gave a curt nod. Inside the room, Adana felt her heart pounding. She knew the humiliations the criminal justice system forced upon detainees, but she never imagined she would experience it herself. She kept her head high as Reynolds methodically checked her clothes, patted her down once more, and looked for hidden items. There were none. Reynolds handed Adana back her clothes. "You're clear," she said, her eyes apologetic. "I'm sorry about all this, Judge Carter, but the system is the system." Adana managed a small, grateful nod. "I appreciate your professionalism." When Reynolds brought her out, Merrick was waiting in the hall. Without warning, he grabbed Adana's arm and propelled her toward a separate corridor leading to the temporary holding cells. Before Reynolds or Thompson could intervene, Merrick shoved Adana into an interrogation room with a small metal table and a single bright lamp hanging overhead. He slammed the door behind them, leaving Thompson and Reynolds behind. The sound reverberated with a menacing echo that made both women exchange worried glances. Inside the windowless room, Adana stood facing Merrick. The fluorescent light gleamed on her carefully styled hair, accenting the tension in her jaw. She forced herself to remain poised. "Take a seat," Merrick ordered, pointing to a cold metal chair. Adana complied, though every fiber of her being screamed at the injustice. She had dedicated her life to upholding the law, and now she was at the mercy of a rogue officer whose behavior was the antithesis of the values she believed in. Merrick glowered. "You think you're someone special, don't you? Driving around in your fancy car, flashing that judge's badge, expecting a free pass." She met his gaze. "No, I only expect you to follow proper procedures." That statement seemed to spark fresh anger. He leaned forward. "Proper procedures? For all I know, you've been using your position to shield yourself from suspicion for a long time. Maybe I finally caught you doing something." Adana's patience was unraveling. "That's baseless, and you know it. I have no record, no history of misconduct. You pulled me over for rolling a stop sign. That's a minor traffic issue. You escalated this." Merrick's expression twisted, as though the truth of her words only fueled his rage. "I found it suspicious that you had no fear, no excuses. Who acts like that if they aren't hiding something?" Adana blinked. "Or perhaps I wasn't afraid because I had nothing to hide." He snorted. "People lie all the time." She shook her head. "Officer Merrick, you are setting yourself up for a massive lawsuit, not to mention a disciplinary action. I strongly advise you to stop this. Let me go, and we can sort out the legalities appropriately." The faintest flicker of uncertainty rippled across Merrick's features, but it vanished in an instant, replaced by renewed determination. "I'm booking you for resisting arrest. That means you'll be staying in lockup tonight, at least until you're arraigned." Adana's eyes narrowed. "I will see a magistrate in the morning, and you know exactly what's going to happen. The charges will be dropped. Then I will take the appropriate steps against you." His nostrils flared. The brunt of his frustration, built up over years of feeling, overshadowed by people with money and influence, crashed onto Adana. "We'll see about that," he growled. The door opened, and Sergeant Roscoe stepped in, face drawn with concern. "Merrick, we need to talk. Now." Merrick turned but did not move. "We're in the middle of an interrogation, Sergeant." Roscoe cast him a reproachful glare. "I don't care what you think you're doing. I just got off the phone with Friedman Law Center. Judge Carter's attorney is on his way over. We'll process her by the book. And that's it. Understand?" Merrick ground his teeth. "Fine. I was just making sure we have a clear statement on record." Roscoe motioned to Adana. "Judge Carter, you'll be placed in a holding cell for the night if they can't get bail sorted out immediately. We're following procedure, but rest assured we're not going to allow any further improprieties." He shot Merrick a pointed look, but said nothing more. Gesturing for her to follow, he led Adana out of the interrogation room. Merrick trailed behind, glowering silently. At the holding cell, Roscoe paused. "We'll do our best to expedite your release, Judge Carter. Mr. Powers is a strong advocate. He'll help make sense of this." Adana gave him a courteous nod, though her jaw was clenched. She stepped into the cell, where a thin mattress lay on a metal bunk frame. The cell door clanged shut, the final echo of injustice reverberating through the corridors. Thompson approached Merrick, who stood at the edge of the booking station. "Lance, are you satisfied now?" she demanded in a low voice. You've arrested a superior court judge for a routine traffic stop. This is going to blow up in our faces." He spun on her, eyes blazing. She got mouthy, tried to tell me how to do my job. She needed to be taught a lesson. Thompson shook her head, not sure whether to be disgusted or frightened. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is wrong. Mark my words. You'll pay for this." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Merrick standing alone in the corridor, the gravity of his actions slowly seeping in. That night passed slowly for Adana. The holding cell's unforgiving concrete walls pressed in on her, each hour punctuated by distant noises from the station, drunken shouting, the clank of cell doors, the hum of fluorescent lights. She tried to find solace in the fact that her attorney, Robert Powers, was a fierce and diligent advocate who would not rest until she was released. Yet the reality of spending the night in a cell weighed heavily. She was used to being on the other side of the bench, sending criminals to jail, not languishing behind bars herself. Sleep proved elusive. She closed her eyes, but every time she drifted off, she jolted awake with a start. The bleakness of her surroundings, a jarring reminder of her situation. At dawn, Powers arrived, brandishing legal documents and a stern demeanor that signaled he meant business. Within an hour, bail was arranged, and Adana was escorted out of the cell. There was a flurry of paperwork and hushed conversations among the station staff. Officer Merrick was conspicuously absent from the release process. Thompson, however, hovered nearby, silent guilt etched into her features. Robert Powers, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a piercing gaze, guided Adana out of the precinct's heavy doors. Sunlight sliced across her face, and the fresh air felt like liberation itself. As soon as they were in his car, Powers turned to her. "Adana, are you all right?" She exhaled shakily. "I'm fine, physically, but I'm furious and embarrassed. This is beyond unacceptable, Robert. That officer humiliated me, threatened me, even after he saw my credentials." Powers nodded grimly. "We'll fight this. It won't stand. I'll gather every piece of evidence we can, body cam footage, surveillance tapes, witness statements. Officer Merrick will be lucky if he still has a badge by the time we're done." She forced a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." He put the car into drive. "Let's get you home. You need to rest. Then we'll discuss how to proceed." They drove in silence, Adana's thoughts racing. She replayed the night's events, Merrick's aggressive demeanor, Thompson's uneasy stance, Roscoe's attempts to maintain professionalism amid the chaos. She knew how the system worked. There was a chance that some in the department might try to close ranks to protect Merrick. But she also knew the law was on her side, and she intended to use every bit of her knowledge to ensure justice prevailed. When Powers dropped her at her condo in Rittenhouse Square, she felt a swell of relief stepping into her spacious, minimalist living room. Hardwood floors and tall windows offered an airy reprieve from the claustrophobic cell. She quickly shed her wrinkled suit jacket, noticing a faint odor of disinfectant clinging to the fabric. Alone at last, she sank onto her sofa, burying her face in her hands. The anger and humiliation she'd kept bottled up began to pour out in shaking shoulders and muffled sobs. For the first time since last night, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the violation, the sense of utter powerlessness. After a few minutes, she brushed away tears and composed herself. Enough. Self-pity would not bring accountability. She was a judge, and she had the tools to fight back. She would not be defined by this momentary humiliation. Meanwhile, Lance Merrick drove through the city in his own storm of emotions. He was supposed to be off duty, but the adrenaline in his veins kept him wired and restless. His mind replayed images of the arrest, Judge Carter's unwavering gaze, Thompson's protests, Roscoe's disapproving glare. A cold pit formed in his stomach, Every time he remembered the look on Carter's face when she revealed she was a judge, he tried to reassure himself that he had done the right thing. She had been disrespectful. She had tried to use her title to dodge responsibility. At least, that's what he told himself. His phone buzzed, jarring him from his thoughts. He pulled over to check it. To his dismay, it was an internal affairs summons. He'd been ordered to meet with Captain Denise Spencer first thing in the morning. "Great," he muttered, throwing the phone onto the passenger seat. He knew Captain Spencer was not one to take misconduct lightly. She was a stickler for regulations, with an unblemished record of holding officers accountable. If there was any shred of wrongdoing in his actions, she would find it. As Merrick made his way to the precinct the next day, tension gnawed at him. When he entered Captain Spencer's office, he noted the stern lines around her mouth, her no-nonsense posture behind her desk. "Officer Merrick," she said curtly, "sit." He sat, unable to meet her piercing eyes for more than a second at a time. "I've just received preliminary reports of last night's incident," she began. "I also have a statement from the Friedman Law Center demanding a formal investigation. A judge was arrested on questionable grounds, and there are allegations of excessive force. What do you have to say for yourself?" Merrick squared his shoulders. "I was doing my duty, Captain." She rolled a stop sign, refused to comply fully, and became confrontational. Spencer's eyebrows arched. "So you felt it necessary to arrest a superior court judge, place her in a cell overnight, and charge her with drug possession when no drugs were found?" A flicker of panic flashed across Merrick's eyes. "I suspected she was hiding something." She was acting too calm, as though she was above suspicion. Spencer's jaw tightened. "Acting calm is not probable cause. According to your partner, Officer Thompson, Judge Carter showed no sign of threat or aggression. Thompson also states that you escalated the situation unreasonably." "Care to explain that?" Merrick felt his face grow hot. "My partner is overreacting. She doesn't understand that sometimes you have to be forceful in certain situations, and Judge Carter wasn't exactly cooperative." Spencer leaned forward. Multiple witnesses, including Sergeant Roscoe, confirmed that Judge Carter was calm and cooperative throughout. "Further, your body camera footage is concerning. It appears you continued to question her aggressively long after it was clear she posed no threat." He stiffened. "I stand by my decision to ensure the safety of the public. Judges don't get special treatment." Spencer's mouth set in a firm line. "Yes, we treat everyone equally under the law. That means you follow due process, no matter who the suspect is. There is substantial evidence to suggest you violated standard procedures. Internal Affairs will conduct a formal investigation. In the meantime, you're suspended, effective immediately." Merrick's heart lurched. "Suspended? Turn in your badge and your firearm," Spencer said, her voice resolute. "You are to cooperate fully with Internal Affairs." "Do you understand?" He swallowed, his world turning upside down. "Yes, Captain," he said finally, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. When he left the office, he felt like a husk of himself. The badge he had fought so hard to earn, the symbol of authority he clung to in order to escape his upbringing, was taken away. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. A sliver of remorse crept into his mind, but his pride smothered it. Instead, he fixated on the notion that Judge Carter was the real culprit, responsible for tarnishing his career. The seeds of resentment burrowed deeper into him. Adana, on the other hand, was back in her chambers at the Philadelphia Municipal Court. News of her ordeal had spread through the courthouse grapevine, and staff members gave her worried glances. Some expressed open concern, offering sympathetic remarks. Yet, she could sense an undercurrent of shock. How could this happen to a sitting judge? She did her best to project confidence, but inside, she still felt a simmering cauldron of anger and humiliation. She had a stack of case files to review for the day, but her mind wandered. The memory of Merrick's hand shoving her into the squad car, the snap of handcuffs on her wrists, the cold swirl of the cell's air, these images refused to leave her alone. Around midday, Robert Powers arrived. She invited him into her office, closing the door behind them. Powers carried a manila folder, thick with documents. "I have some updates," he announced, setting the folder on her desk. First, the good news: the Philadelphia Police Department has suspended Officer Merrick, pending an internal investigation. That's standard procedure with any serious allegation. Adana breathed a measured sigh of relief. "At least they're taking it seriously," Powers nodded. "Also, the Friedman Law Center wants to file a civil rights lawsuit on your behalf. They think this could be a pivotal case in addressing police misconduct, especially concerning people of color. And in your position, you have a platform to bring attention to this issue." She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingertips together. "I do want accountability, not just for me, but for anyone else who's experienced something like this. However, I also need to balance my responsibilities as a judge. This can't become a personal crusade that undermines my impartiality in the courtroom." Powers smiled gently. "Understood. We can proceed carefully. We'll gather evidence and let the facts speak for themselves. Given the circumstances, it's likely to go to trial unless the city settles out of court." Adana pursed her lips. "If they offer a settlement, I'm not inclined to accept it quietly. I'd want a change in policy. Mandatory training for officers, something that ensures this doesn't happen again. Money alone doesn't solve anything." Powers nodded. "Exactly. We can push for that. Additionally, the district attorney's office might look into potential criminal charges for excessive force if the evidence warrants it." Adana's eyes flashed. "I won't object if that happens." Officer Merrick's behavior was criminal. Powers placed a supportive hand on her desk. "Remember, you're not just any plaintiff. You're a superior court judge. This is going to draw massive media attention. Journalists have already been sniffing around for details." A flicker of anxiety passed through her. She had always tried to keep her personal life out of the public eye. Now she would be under a spotlight she never asked for. So be it. Let them see the truth. They spoke for another hour, strategizing possible legal angles. When Powers left, Adana finally felt a sense of direction. She wasn't helpless. She would use the law, her domain, to fight back. The next few weeks saw a frenzy of developments. The Friedman Law Center officially filed a lawsuit on behalf of Judge Adana Carter, alleging violations of her Fourth and 14th Amendment rights. News outlets scrambled for every detail, from the night of the arrest to Merrick's checkered disciplinary record. Debates raged on social media about police power, racial profiling, and abuses of authority. Merrick, suspended and isolated, faced mounting stress. The city's press tore into him, painting him as a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement. He found himself avoiding grocery stores and coffee shops, worried he might be recognized. Harassed, or worse, his own neighbors whispered behind his back, and even old friends kept their distance. In an ill-advised move, Merrick accepted an invitation to appear on a small local podcast run by a friend of a friend. He believed it would give him a platform to tell his side of the story. The conversation quickly went off the rails. He accused Judge Carter of acting superior and flaunting her position, only fueling public outrage. Clips of the interview circulated on social media, inciting condemnation from community leaders and calls for the police department to fire him outright. In private, Merrick's resentment turned into a twisted obsession. He believed that Carter's status had unfairly targeted him. "They're crucifying me because she's a judge," he told himself. If she'd been anyone else, nobody would care. He conveniently ignored the possibility that his actions had been unjustifiable in any circumstance. On the other side of the city, Adana found herself juggling the demands of her judicial docket with the emotional weight of the lawsuit. She had recused herself from any case involving the Philadelphia Police Department to avoid conflicts of interest. Many of her colleagues in the courthouse rallied behind her, signing open letters condemning police misconduct. Meanwhile, civil rights groups hailed her courage in stepping forward. Yet beneath the public show of strength, Adana battled private nightmares, flashbacks of the cell, the feeling of Merrick's grip on her arm, the humiliating strip search. It made her second-guess the system she had devoted her life to. She had always believed the rule of law was a sturdy bulwark against abuses. But her experience proved it could be shockingly fragile, especially for a black woman, even one who wore the robe of a judge. Despite these trials, she pressed on, determined to see the lawsuit through. During pre-trial motions, Friedman Law Center attorneys deposed Merrick, Thompson, Roscoe, and other witnesses. The body camera footage, while partially missing crucial segments, painted a damning picture of Merrick's hostility. Throughout it all, Adana tried to maintain her composure. She reminded herself that the wheels of justice turned slowly, but they did turn. And in this instance, she prayed they would land squarely on the side of truth. As the lawsuit moved toward trial, new information began to emerge, courtesy of the Internal Affairs investigation. It turned out Merrick had multiple complaints on file, allegations of excessive force that were either dismissed or quietly settled in the past. None involved a high-profile figure like a judge, so they had never drawn significant media scrutiny. But now, that pattern of behavior was front and center. Worse for Merrick, a surprising twist came from none other than his partner, Officer Maria Thompson. She decided to testify on behalf of Adana. The Friedman Law Center subpoenaed Thompson, who recounted how Merrick had escalated the situation, refusing to de-escalate even when it was clear that Judge Carter posed no threat. Merrick's attorney tried to discredit Thompson, implying that she had personal issues with Merrick. But Thompson stood her ground. She'd wrestled with guilt for weeks, and while it pained her to go against a fellow officer, she couldn't lie under oath. With tears in her eyes, she described how powerless she felt, watching Merrick degrade Adana in a way that no one should endure, much less a fellow officer of the court. The trial was set for mid-December, an event the media dubbed the Carter case. Commentators predicted a settlement, but Adana refused. "We're seeing this to the end," she told Powers. "I want the truth laid out plainly." As the day of opening arguments approached, tension in the city ran high. Civil rights activists planned to rally outside the courthouse, demanding accountability. Police union representatives insisted Merrick was being railroaded. Editorials in the Philadelphia Inquirer debated the broader implications for police reform. On the eve of the trial, Merrick received more bad news. The district attorney's office was considering filing criminal charges against him based on the Internal Affairs report. While not guaranteed, the mere possibility made him feel cornered. Fear clashed with his anger, resulting in an unstable mixture of desperation. Determined to salvage his reputation, Merrick planned a bold, misguided move. He intended to apologize publicly to Judge Carter, hoping it might soften the lawsuit or at least sway public opinion. That evening, he showed up uninvited at a small charity event for youth mentorship that Judge Carter had long supported. It was held at a community center in North Philly, the place where Adana had volunteered as a law student. She was there, speaking to donors and participants. Merrick appeared at the doors, wearing street clothes, eyes darting around. A hush fell as people recognized him. In an instant, cameras and phones were trained on him, capturing the tense moment. Adana, mid-conversation with a young mentee, froze when she spotted him. The sight of the man who had arrested and humiliated her made her skin crawl. Nonetheless, she stood tall, unwilling to show fear. Merrick approached slowly, an uneasy tension crackling in the air. Attendees stepped aside, forming a cautious circle around them. "Judge Carter," he began, his voice faltering. "1. I wanted to talk to you." Powers, who was nearby, quickly stepped in. "What are you doing here, Officer Merrick?" "This is private property." Merrick held up his hands. "I came to apologize," he said, though his eyes flickered with something more complex than remorse. "I realize I made a mistake. It escalated and, well, I'm sorry." Adana studied him for a moment, sensing the weight of cameras capturing every breath. "Officer Merrick, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is not the proper venue for, please," he interrupted, voice strained. "I'm about to lose everything. My job, my pension, my reputation." His voice broke, perhaps genuinely, or perhaps for the cameras. "I'm just asking for understanding." Adana's gaze hardened. "You humiliated me, violated my rights, and tried to cover it up by inventing false charges. This isn't about understanding. It's about accountability." Merrick's lips parted as though he had more to say, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder, many urging him to leave. Realizing he wouldn't find redemption here, Merrick turned on his heel and stormed out. The cameras followed him, capturing his hunched shoulders. Adana stood in silence for a long moment. Powers gently touched her elbow. "You all right?" She nodded, exhaling the breath she'd been holding. "Let's just say I'm more determined than ever." The day of the trial arrived. It was a brisk December morning, the kind where the breath forms clouds in the air. Protesters braved the cold outside City Hall, chanting slogans about justice and reform. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious civilians, off-duty officers, and supporters of Judge Carter. The tension was palpable. Adana sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Powers and a team of Friedman Law Center attorneys. On the defense side, Merrick looked visibly strained, flanked by his own legal counsel and representatives from the police union. He had hoped his public apology would sway public sentiment, but the predominant narrative painted him as a symbol of deep-rooted issues within the system. Judge Davis, presiding over the case, was known for fairness and composure. After the jury was seated, the attorneys gave their opening statements. Powers laid out the case in clear, stark detail: an officer's abuse of power, a judge's rights violated, and the broader implications for the community. Merrick's defense attorney countered, painting a picture of an overworked cop who made a split-second decision, insisting race played no role and that Merrick didn't realize Carter was a judge until it was too late. Over the next days, witnesses testified, including Thompson and Sergeant Roscoe. The body camera footage was played in court, though certain segments were mysteriously missing. Nevertheless, what remained was enough to show Merrick's aggression and Adana's calm compliance, contradicting his claims of resistance. The defense tried to argue that Adana's calmness was unusually evasive and that Merrick had reason to fear for his safety. But that line of reasoning only garnered skepticism from the jury. The Friedman Law Center attorneys hammered home that nowhere in the footage or witness testimony was there any sign of threat from Adana. Midway through the trial, the tension spiked when the Friedman Law Center revealed additional documents from Merrick's personnel file, detailing prior complaints of excessive force. The defense fought fiercely to exclude them, but Judge Davis allowed portions in, citing relevance to Merrick's credibility and pattern of behavior. Outside the courthouse, the city buzzed with each revelation. Editorials denounced the blue wall of silence that had enabled Merrick's pattern of misconduct. Activists demanded deeper reforms. Inside, a weary but determined Adana felt vindication brewing. At last, after days of testimony, both sides rested their cases. The jury deliberated for 2 days. During that time, Adana tried to keep herself busy, presiding over administrative tasks. She felt restless, knowing the fate of her case and a significant step toward broader justice lay in the hands of the jury. Then, on a chilly Friday afternoon, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. Courtroom seats filled again, the same hush descending as the jury filed in. The foreman stood. "Your Honor," the foreman began, "we find in favor of the plaintiff, Judge Adana Carter. We find that Officer Lance Merrick did violate her constitutional rights by subjecting her to excessive force and false arrest. We also find that his actions were motivated, in part, by racial bias and an abuse of power." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Adana closed her eyes, relief flooding her. A moment later, the foreman read the damages: a substantial monetary award, plus an order for mandatory bias and de-escalation training for the police department. The Friedman Law Center attorneys exchanged triumphant looks. Merrick stared ahead, jaw clenched. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, but he shrugged it off. The defense had been decimated, and the final blow was the judge's final statement affirming the jury's decision. "I hope this serves as a reminder that no one is above the law, not even those entrusted to enforce it." In the weeks following the verdict, the repercussions for Merrick piled on. The Philadelphia Police Department formally terminated him. Then the district attorney's office announced criminal charges: assault under color of authority, falsifying a police report, and perjury related to statements he made during the investigation. He found himself standing in the same courthouse halls he once walked with impunity, only this time as a defendant. The humiliation weighed on him, but what stung most was the realization that no one was coming to his rescue. The police union had distanced itself, citing Merrick's pattern of misconduct. His friends on the force were silent, unwilling to torpedo their own careers for a disgraced cop. He was alone. Meanwhile, Adana continued her work on the bench with renewed vigor. She participated in police reform discussions and helped draft proposals for better accountability measures. Each time she passed by the intersection where Merrick had originally pulled her over, she felt a pang of memory, but also a surge of resolve. She had survived an unjust system and fought it from within. Now, she intended to make it better. Merrick's criminal trial was swift. The evidence stacked against him, including Thompson's testimony, was overwhelming. He was convicted on multiple counts. The judge, another colleague of Adana's, sentenced him to time in a county facility, citing the need to send a message that no one can violate citizens' rights without consequence, especially not an officer of the law. That was the final blow of karma. Once the proud cop, Merrick found himself in a place he never imagined he'd be: behind bars. The inmates, many of whom had faced abusive police encounters themselves, regarded him with the sort of contempt reserved for traitors. It was a bitter irony. He had once reveled in his power to toss people into cells. Now he felt the cold of steel bars from the other side. Months passed. Adana thrived in her role, lauded by civil rights groups for her courage. The Friedman Law Center used portions of her settlement to fund community outreach and legal clinics, further extending the positive impact of her ordeal. Police reforms, though slow, began to take shape: mandatory body camera policies, more rigorous de-escalation training, and accountability panels that included civilian oversight. For Adana, the personal scars lingered. She would never forget the vulnerability of that holding cell. the humiliation of that forced pat down, but she found a sense of purpose in turning her pain into change, determined that her story would be a catalyst for systemic improvement. As for Merrick, he emerged from prison a broken man, stripped of his career, his reputation, and his illusions. He faded into anonymity, the scorn of public opinion trailing him like a shadow. If he carried any lesson from his downfall, perhaps it was that wielding power without compassion leads inevitably to ruin. And so ends the shocking saga that began with a traffic stop in the dead of night and culminated in a courtroom reckoning. Judge Adana Carter's courage illuminated a stark truth that justice, while sometimes slow, can still prevail when the oppressed stand firm. Officer Lance Merrick, once cloaked in the authority of a badge, discovered that no one is invincible when wielding power recklessly. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into a story rife with power struggles, hidden biases, and the resilience of one determined woman. If this story moved you, ignited your sense of justice, or reminded you of the importance of speaking up, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that spotlight crucial social issues. Together, let's continue advocating for fairness and equality, one story at a time.